So here's the next project at Redish. It's the E46 M3 in Phoenix Yellow, quite a striking millennium colour, really love this one. 2004 with 78,000 miles on. It's an SMG transmission, the owner's had it for a couple of years and it's time for a refresh. It's already been for our RACP Check Report, which is where we look at the underside, mechanical conditions, especially the RACP, including the borescope camera inside, and we find that there are several cracks and problems, not only with the external but also the internal sections, and it's also got wheel arch corrosion on the inside, which is getting a bit more common. So it's time to come in for a refresh, and the owner wants this brought back up to a good standard mechanically and also corrosion prevention as well. So we're going to bring it into the workshop and carry out a fresh assessment. It last came in 10 months ago for its inspection. It's now the time to do the actual work. The workshop slots become available after a 10-month lead time. That's roughly about what we are, about 9 to 12 months for our restoration lead times. And here we go, this is the start of the process. So here we are up in the workshop. We get to see the underside for the first time. Remember, it's a 2004, 78,000 mileage, and this is fairly typical. The corrosion just sets in on hardware. It's only got cathodic dipped black painted hardware from the factory, so all that comes off within the first few years, and then corrosion just starts to set in, whether it be surface corrosion on the hardware items or actually starting on the chassis itself there on the RACP. There's the typical hairline crack that we've noticed on the previous inspection, which we did 10 months ago. And this is just a typical sort of underside nowadays. They don't really escape it. Corrosion is prevalent on all of them. Even on my E46 M3 that I bought, it was like this. Mine had about 73,000 miles on it. It was quite corroded as well. And then obviously I've gone through mine and just done the usual bits, powder coating and the typical sort of things that these cars need. Chassis corrosion on battery boxes and things like that. So it's got, on our initial road test, we've experienced the typical grinding noise when doing slow speed manoeuvring, parking, turns and slight slower turns. That's the differential clutch packs inside that are grinding or slipping, together, making a grinding noise. So the differential is probably going to require an overhaul if the owner wants to go into it to solve that. We've also got an interesting rotational or mechanical buzzing noise going on from the center console area, about 1500 to 2000 RPM, so we'll have to investigate that. We can see it's been apart before because somebody's had the plates off, and although they're not handed, the factory waxed the left hand side of the car, and you can always tell that it's been apart because that plate there has been put back on 180 degrees out, because that black wax should be in line with that one, and they're from the left hand side. So somebody's had this apart. We can also see there's a little bend in there. I also know it's been apart as well because up on there the GPS sensor wiring loom there is not clipped in to the heat shield clip. So we'll take it all apart and see if somebody's left something loose. Might be a gearbox rubber mount broken or snapped. That's quite common, that gives vibrations. So we're just going to be going through the car. First of all, strip down, do a fresh assessment, check out the corrosion, see if it's changed much in the last 10 months since the car came in. We know we're definitely going into the jacking points and things like that, because having all these cracks in the seam sealer is no good, because it's just showing that corrosion is in between the metal layers, growing and forcing the seam sealer open until it can't be stable anymore, and then it just breaks, which obviously then just amplifies the situation, because if it's not protected from the elements, then water just gets in and salt, and then it just carries on exploding even more, especially around the V-brace mounting boxes as well. A little bit on the left hand side, you can see the cracks have developed in there. We'll check out the jacking points to see if they've tipped. That's another common thing. Sometimes they change sort of angle because they are weak structurally inside, and they're not always held on yet. There's a little bit of a crease in that one that's started to just go up. So first thing with anything is to get it all stripped apart, get all of this hardware off, and axle out, fuel tank out, brake pipes and exhaust system, prop shaft, heat shields, things like that, and then look at the actual structure of the vehicle in closer detail. So a day or so later, and it's all stripped down, we can see the underside. The last thing in the vehicle is the gearbox. Everything else is off. Brake pipes, fuel tank, exhaust, heat shield, prop shaft, rear axle, the lot. It's all off, including the clips and fixings, and that's what they look like underneath. That's just a normal sort of underside road grime, a dirt film that's just been building up over the last sort of 18, 19 years. The mud, that's quite common as well. I mean, we've all got this sort of on our vehicles, haven't we? If we're driving them in certain weathers and sometimes all years round, it's just a collection of mud. Where you don't want that mud to collect is on the inside of the arches, because up in there in that U-shaped channel, if it stays damp with wet mud, that's really where the corrosion starts growing and eating inner arches apart. So we'll see that in better detail once we clean those areas up and see if there's any problems on them. The RACP, now it's apart, we can see the area we cleaned during our report. There's the crack on this side. This is the horizontal face going toward the back of the car there, front of the car over there, and then when you turn around, quite a large crack actually for a car in its late 70s mileage wise. Decent old length on that one, so we'll make sure that's stop drilled and check out all the other spot welds as well. We commonly find other spot welds in these areas that drop, so we'll check those areas. There might be a little bit of one just up there starting to show itself, and then sometimes on the edges, yeah, we've got 2 broken spot welds, one there and another one just there. Might show itself as a little crack in the seam sealer. Yep, there is. Follow that little line there, there's a crack present and then sort of disappears. So that's showing the RACP is just slightly moving. And then around the front mounting point, we've got a little bit of a crack coming out of that spot weld just down there. The spot weld is broken and a little bit of a crack around these concentrated sort of press-ins where the bushes hit. Movement or possibly broken spot weld in those two. That one looks all right. And then I bet you there's a crack around there, normally signified by that corrosion mark. That's just where the pin is flexing and moving. I say a pin, it's a bolt. There's also a little hairline crack around that one that will need drilling out and we're re-welding as well. Just working on the brackets at the moment. Brake pipe brackets just being removed. Fuel tank bracket partially being removed, just drilling out the spot welds to get that lifted. Look, that's the corrosion factor underneath it. Not actually what's hidden, like the hump, behind the hump of the bracket is actually okay, but it's the contact patches where the metal to metal contact is. When that was spot welded on at the factory and the E-coat did not get in between the two tightly touching panels, it stayed bare metal, and obviously you get moisture over 18, 19 years, it's going to corrode, isn't it? So that's what we are getting out and replacing with the Redish Motorsport brackets. Same on this side, that brake pipe bracket's pretty nasty. It's gone now, so we'll take care of all this corrosion bubbling under there as well. That's what was underneath the fuel tank bracket. That's where the fuel tank has been rubbing on the RACP. It's just been creating a bare metal effect. And then you look at other areas of the car and they're absolutely beautiful. Just not even any seam sealer needed. They just stay fantastic. It doesn't take much to actually corrode cars, moisture and salts and water and mud and things like that. And then you get the handbrake console where the E-coat is failing and all that needs taking off and renewing. Same to the front fuel tank brackets. These ones are pretty hanging as well, so they'll be coming off because those ones just are trapping a nice bit of corrosion. We've also got a lot of corrosion sort of on the edges of panel overlaps. This is a bulkhead panel, you can't buy that one, it sort of like strengthens the bulkhead. This is where your calves would sit. If you're a rear passenger, sat on the seat bench, your legs and the back of your calves would sit against this one. That's a separate panel you can't do anything with. And then you've got the actual bulkhead there where it meets to the floor pan. That line there is lifting with corrosion. So all that needs to be thought about and decided how far we're going into this. Like I said before, we know we're going and on customer instruction doing the seal panels because these seals and jacking points have got a corrosion growth in them. We're going to need to do something with the jacking points as well, I would suggest, but it all comes down to owners' plans and visions and timescales and budgets and things like that, but those ones are suffering, as are some of the seals. Look at the edge of the seal here. So these covers will come off, these plastic seal covers, eventually, and that will expose some more problems down here where we've got corrosion breaking through the original seam sealer. Now that's a lot of that is unnoticeable because all the plastic covers are on, but like I say, when they come off we'll find them out a little bit more. Spring perches are also corroded, as are probably the turrets. No, I'm surprised. There's a little bit on the back edge of the turret, a little bit of corrosion colour up there that will need to be taken care of, but not as much as I was thinking. Battery box, yep, typical sort of problems there as well, so that will all be coming off and just systematically going through the vehicle and removing as much corrosion as we possibly can without taking panels apart or taking the car apart piece by piece and putting on a jig. They're not at that sort of age or value yet where they really warrant this, I don't think, but prove us wrong. If you've got one out there that you think, absolutely, I want to do more, I want to have the best one in the country, if not the world, do get in touch and let us know. Studs for the boot floor sort of brackets, there's 3 of them along this side. This is the curvature of the boot floor, and it houses, or those studs hold a cover for the carbon canister, which is like a fuel neutralising piece, and that one snapped due to corrosion. So did that one. That one survived, but doesn't look that coarse, the thread, anymore, so that one might need to be replaced as well. And that's just the rear end of the vehicle. We're not really yet discovering the centre, undersides, or even the front. So we've got plenty of work cut out over the next few weeks, and we'll carry on with the corrosion removal stuff. Preparation work's going well, so all the brackets have been removed, corrosion removed as well, and treatment of the metal around these areas with a PUL 15 metal prep, just to neutralise the corrosion and try and keep it in a stable position, because this car is going to be in this state for many, many days, and it's easy for corrosion to try and rehaze. There's a perfect example here where there's little bits of corrosion that are still pitted in the metal, which we're going to have to deal with, either thin that area out or put a rust converter on there and then weld through primer as well on this and on the back of the reinforcement plate before we cover that area up. That's what we have to get rid of. Corrosion is the biggest and most time-consuming part of these entire jobs now. I mean, we've been doing these for 11, possibly 12 years as it's coming up to, and we've seen it all pretty much. And it's nowadays the crack repair and reinforcement, even including the boot floor work, isn't too bad a job. It's the rust and the corrosion that sets into these vehicles is surprising, and that's what we have to do, is make sure that they're in a good standing order to receive a protection layer later on in the process. And there's many ways that different companies do it. Some companies just paint the localized areas that they've welded, some paint over the corroded brackets, whereas we tend to go for it in a restoration sort of viewpoint. We want these cars to last so long. They're already on average about 20-ish years old, so we want them to see another 20 years if possible without any substantial holes from corrosion build-up. So that's why we put a lot of effort into bare metaling so much and taking brackets off and replacing them for different ones. So what we're doing here is taking out the problematic areas, obviously stop drilled the cracks before any of this bare metaling effect happens. So we've got 2 stop drills there which signify the ends of the cracks, which are going to need to be welded shortly. We've also got a little one which we think we're identifying just up here, and we're going to be checking that with probably a dye pen, but there's a possibility of a little one just there, so we're going to look into that a bit further. We know we've got the broken spot welds on this side of the arch panel. There's one there and one there, and that's all being dug out because that will be doing our trademark stitch weld all the way down there. The factory apply a stitch weld just there where the corner overlap of the separate panel, which is known as the spring perch, gets involved and comes into contact with the wheel arch panel. And then we continue that all the way down until somewhere around about here, which just tries to help stabilize that panel, because it's just held on with 3 spot welds. It's crazy. One, the other one's there 2, and the other one's there 3. That's all that's holding that on. And in line with that rear axle beam, there's the left rear mount point, there's the right rear, that area there, the energy pulling down when you apply the throttle on this part of the axle is significant. And it's got other spot welds around the perimeter here and where it goes around the boot floor, and on the inner rectangle here where it overlaps the boot floor panel inside and chassis legs, but still 3 spot welds on there is pretty insignificant, so that's why we stitch weld that area as well. Front mounting points, again, we've just shown that it has got cracks. This is our first stage opening just to show that they've got cracks. So we do, at the end of where we believe the cracks are, we do a stop drill. 8mm we can do on the underside because there's a platform behind it, so that allows us to do a nice penetrating plug weld into that piece. Up on the vertical section there's nothing behind it, so you can only do 2mm up there, but 8mm underneath, and then we do a sort of another middle one, and then do 2 lines which then join. And we don't do anything on this line, and what we try to then show and prove on our videos is that that circle there, that semicircular piece, which we haven't introduced or cut, proves that that's the crack, that's where it is. So that's why we leave those on until the video comes along and then we show that that was the crack. That's what we need to do. There's no point just welding on top of it. We find it's always best to take a piece out because you can then actually get to the threaded platform inside, which is 2mm thick, apply that plug weld, and that will fill up all that. It will connect the threaded receiver better to the part of the RACP, because other than that it's got 5 spot welds, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, not that much, and 2 MIG welds in here underneath the seat panel, but applying further MIG welds in there, and more so on the right hand side because they get even more cracked, that will all be nicely connected together to try and stabilize the lower side. And areas that we got problems with spot welds, like that one there, we'll probably then drill those ones out. That one looks a bit odd, doesn't it? You can see how nice these ones are and these ones. That one up there has already been plugged and replaced with us today, and that one are going to need some further work when we get onto this stage of reinforcing or repairing the internal platform which stabilizes the threaded receiver. And what a threaded receiver is the thread up there, which is what the subframe bolts screw into. So that shows you where we are. Taking off corrosion on the other parts of the RACP as well, on the roof section. That's the rib panel up there. Then we've got the spring perch, which is suffering with corrosion. And on the left-hand side as well, just taking out all of those areas that are nothing to do with the RACP repair and reinforcement process, but we tend to do them because, as you've seen on our videos over the years, we don't just paint the localized mounts, we go through the car in a great way. So we paint from really pretty much at the back of the vehicle, well past the front edge of the RACP, going into the seat panel. And then if somebody wants extra corrosion work dealt with, like in this seat panel and fuel tank housing area and rear train arm pockets and forward fuel tank strap brackets, then we'll do so as well. That just requires more degreasing work, more corrosion removal, sometimes panel replacements. But that just gives you an idea of where we are, what we're doing with the RACP, and it's going to be now crack, repair, welding, and then later on going into the reinforcement stage with the Redish V3 reinforcement plates. Well, work's going well. Let's update on the Phoenix Yellow E46 M3. Technician Dave's been doing a great job removing the corrosion around the rear of the vehicle, battery box area especially, where we typically had the battery box bracket corroded in the two upper ones. That's all gone now and been treated with rust converter. Been put into a stable state of graphene primer just to make sure it doesn't haze or cause any problems whilst it's on the vehicle lift for the next week or two, still having extensive other work done. So RACP work is done as well. Cracks were repaired, reinforced with the Redish V3. Nowadays it's always standard to do the V3 load relief system, the plates that come inside our kit which connect the back of the RACP through the boot floor to the chassis legs. It closes a hollow channel where they used to flex and pull, and that now means that the RACP isn't likely to move any further. It's been stitch welded down the side to connect the RACP to the wheel arch panel, which is a common thing we've been doing. Change over the brackets, get rid of those nasty BMW brackets and put on there the new Redish Motorsport brake pipe brackets and fuel tank strap brackets, both sides. Plus we've got to do the front ones as well, and just taking those ones off. Opening up the seams as well, something we're having to do more and more now. The seams between the floor panel and the rear bulkhead, sort of rear seat, fuel tank area panel, those ones are breaking through with corrosion. You can see little lines of corrosion sort of bursting out of the seam sealer where the panel overlaps are, and that's just all down to trapped corrosion. So we're having to take more of that sort of stuff out, slightly tease open the panel, dig it out with picks, treat it as best as possible. You can't really ever solve stuff like that unless you were putting the car on a body shop or manufacturer's jig and taking every single panel off. And literally there is corrosion on all cars between panels. There's just no way of getting around it. So unless you're doing a panel by panel restoration, you can't ever sort of guarantee that every single thing is out, but you can certainly do your best and try. Just bare metal in the left rear jacket, the left rear R-tab cradle at the moment. Corrosion on the inside, which isn't too much of a worry. We also have to dig around the outside as well, because what we want to do is make sure as much as possible is come out from the source of the corrosion. We've got to go into the jack-in points next as well. Actually, you can see it better on this one. Typical sort of jack-in point flex. Very slightly started to crease, just a little bit. It's not totally parallel, got a little bit of a crease going on, so the internal is going to need opening up and want a Redish reinforcement to stop that happening again. Also, the seam sealer has been split in. That's corrosion growth between the three layers. You've got the inner seal, you've got the jack-in point structure, which is MIG welded, by the way, to the underside of the seal, which actually forms part of the quarter panel. We got the corrosion to deal with around the V-brace mounting box as well. We've done the corrosion on the RACP, so around the spring perches. We're also going out into the turret area up there to deal with that corrosion, and we're also doing the Redish CSL wheel arch as well, because this car is a perfect contender for it. It's got corrosion starting, which means it's in there. It needs to be dealt with before that corrosion starts creeping and eventually gets seen on the outside paintwork. But at the same time, we can deal with making this arch a better clearance for a wider tyre, lower car, if it's going to have CSL wheels, lower offset, things like that. So that's going to be all improved. We can take care of the corrosion that sometimes builds up on the edges around the bumper bracket as well, which sometimes causes corrosion growth around the outer panel. That's where people most often see that. We also got to do this jacking point as well, because it's just starting to crease and a little bit of a tip. Deal with the corrosion on the outside, which is now visible since the side skirts have come off. Listen, don't know if you can hear this, ready? Crunchy, not good. So don't know if that's going to hold itself, but we'll see once we get into that area. And then going down the seal, we've got some random corrosion. Normally comes out of the holes where the clipping points are bad. There is a little bit of corrosion now, but it's nowhere near the epicenter of this sort of nastiness. Same with the left-hand side. Very surprising. Listen to this. Crunchy. So that's going to go through possibly. And then we got some of that on the right-hand side as well. I managed to put a little dent in there with my thumb, which creases it. So last thing up is chassis leg. Still plenty to do on the internal chassis legs and the central underside section here. We've got a little bit of corrosion on the transmission tunnel support panel overlap where it goes onto the floor pan, just breaking through there, and a noticeable amount of corrosion breaking through on the chassis leg to the floor pan. Now it won't just be surfaced, there will be some trapped behind that which you can't get to. It won't be horrific, but there will be some. So we're just working at the moment and talking with the owner, just deciding on what's going to be done, whether it's going to be a localized treatment and then flood it with cavity wax after, to try and lower that environment risk of where corrosion can regrow, or whether we're going to take the chassis leg off like we've done on some of the more complex ones and actually media blast it and take it back to bare metal, possibly even weld on a new chassis leg end. Depends if that one's manageable. So lots of work already gone on and lots of work still to come. Working our way down the central section, we found the typical corrosion on the right-hand side chassis leg. It also comes in the transmission tunnel bracket as well up here, which we're working our way through. So what we do, obviously with the permission of the owner, is look at removing the affected section so that we can deal with the trapped corrosion. So what we've done is made an incision cut on the chassis leg in the known areas where we can go through, where it's single skim, and then drill out all the spot welds down that side, a MIG weld there, drill out the spot welds down that side, MIG weld there, and remove it. And this is what you end up with. This is the piece of chassis leg that we've taken off. Now we could see from the outside edges that it was corroding, and we knew that there'd be some trapped corrosion under here. It's not significant, but it is quite nasty. All this is hidden. This is on the contact face, which presses against the floor pan. So there's no way we could get to this bit I'm touching, or this bit, and there's no way we can get on the inside. So we've got a little bit of surface corrosion on the inside and a little bit more around the holes, and there's some cracks there in the E-coat assembly, and a little bit further on to the front. Now we're going to study the cut line on the inside with a camera to make sure there's nothing further in. And most of these contact patches are nice. This area here, these white bits, are bare metal. That's where the E-coat hasn't got in there when it was dipped in the multi-stage E-coat bath at the body in white stage at the factory. But amazingly, they haven't corroded, but on this one it has, and some of these edges it has, and a lot more apparent near the end of it. No cavity wax at all, completely bone dry, just dust in there. So no wonder they rust. I mean, why the factory don't put a good amount of cavity wax in there, I don't know. But then you could argue, this car here is a 2004, so it's approaching it's about 18 years old at the moment, and it's survived. Yes, it has surface corrosion, but there's no structural corrosion on this panel, and it's not got any holes in it. So in theory, the factory have done quite well at saving it, making it last 18 years. It would have lasted 20. It might have lasted 25, but when you're doing a restoration and you want to rid the corrosion of the car, you want to do the most, or the potential, the best possible job, you need to start considering panel replacements. Now amplify that by the hundreds of panels and overlaps there is on the vehicle, and you soon get to understand how long some of the restorations would potentially take if you did a panel by panel replacement. That isn't the full chassis leg, that's just up to the area where then it turns into a double skin, which then means it's nearly impossible to re-weld it correctly again. You'd have to then chase the whole panel out, which goes all the way up to the bulkhead behind the sort of engine area. Then you've got this panel here, which is normally got corrosion on the edges, which is the transmission tunnel bracket. There's one on the left, there's a chassis leg on the left. Then there's panel overlaps everywhere. Like I say, it's hundreds. The car is built up of hundreds of panels. And unless you were to do a piece by piece, panel by panel replacement, you'll never get every last bit of corrosion out. All you'll do is slow it down. And that's more than adequate for most vehicles. Again, knowing that they are 18 years old, 20 years old on average, the cars that we're working on. and they've already lasted this long. They need a helping hand to get through the next 18, 20 years. But there's no great way to rid a car completely of corrosion unless the car was going to be dipped in some of the special liquids that there are available in the UK when you dip a car body shell. But obviously that's a complete, you lose all the outer body paint, you lose, obviously you have to have the wiring loom out, the engine, the gearbox, all the sound deadening. You just send the car as a bare body shell, so it then starts life all over again as if it was being reproduced at BMW. It gets dipped, it gets all of the corrosion out, it comes back so that you can then deal with all the corrosion problems, and then it goes back for further dipping and then finally e-coating, and then you have to do the build up again, which requires full body paint outside and inside, and then an entire rebuild with new sound deadening. You know, those sorts of jobs probably are going to nudge into the probably the late 5 figures, possibly could go into the 6-figure sums if somebody wanted one done to that sort of standard. So this is the next sort of approach. It's systematically going around the car, knowing all the weak points, taking out pieces by pieces and dealing with the localized corrosion, because on the floor pan we do have a bit of corrosion, not a significant amount again, but over the next few years this may well turn into a hole. Who knows? We have seen it once on one E46 M3, a hole on the floor pan due to corrosion growth between the floor pan and the chassis leg. So this is why we turn to this area. But there are loads of areas on E46s that have trapped corrosion, and it's just working out with the owner sort of the best approach for the vehicle, understanding how long the owner's going to keep the vehicle, how their sort of end goal is, if it's going to be a total keeper for the rest of the car's life. So we've got to bear in mind these cars might well be still loved and used by other family members when these cars are 50 years old. It's a crazy thought, but let's hope that these cars get there, and by our sort of approach we certainly hope they will. So we'll get that chassis leg cleaned up now. If it's really pitted or really thin, then we'll go for a replacement chassis leg. Luckily you can still get them from BMW. We'll clean up the floor plan, take out the interior, remove the sound deadening, and then start the welding process to plug weld and connect the new chassis leg, and then do the weld line around that end, linish it back so it's nearly invisible, and then prepare it with obviously weld through primer before it goes onto the contact points. The inside will be painted with etch primer, graphene based, and then later on, once it's all seam sealed, all these areas will be flooded with cavity wax, so this sort of thing shouldn't happen again. So whilst this car is having its restoration underside work done and is so far stripped apart, it's a great time to consider other options, whether it be the brake pipes, subframe, bushes, other things, mechanical items like that. And the flywheel and clutch are going to be done as a package. So that's why the gearbox has now come out. So we've got the gearbox out of this tunnel area here. All the SMG components are just held up on the side at the moment, the hydraulic systems of them. The SMGs do take longer because they've got all the extra gear selection system and actuators and the hydraulic assemblies that go down the side, and unfortunately they're always quite seized up, especially on this little joint here, which you can see the corrosion on it. There's 2 dowel pins which normally allow the selector, which is from this gear actuator, to separate from the back of the gearbox selector rod, and they're very seized. They also require either heating up or small amounts of percussive persuasion, should we say, and then eventually they do come out, so we get them separated, and then that allows the gearbox to remove, which is the whole unit just down here. So it's just come out of the vehicle. We're going to do the detent springs as well whilst it's out, as well as a nice few components inside of the bell housing. So we do the release bearing because that comes with the clutch kit. Here's the flywheel, the dual mass flywheel, and the clutch kit. You get the pressure plate, the friction disc, and also the release bearing. We go then a bit further and do some more items inside the bell housing. So we'll be doing the guide sleeve, which is what the release bearing runs up and down on, because you can find that they do get scratched over the years of operation going backwards and forwards. That's what sometimes gives this corrosion markings, and you don't want the new components running on an old guide sleeve. So that gets replaced, as does the fork, the ball pin, and the spring clip behind there. And also there's the detent springs, which are important because on the SMGs they can snap, the 2 on the passenger side. Flywheel bolts, clutch bolts, and then there's the new lock rings as well for the selector rod. And that's the system dealt with. Our spigot bearing for the end of the crankshaft. And once the old flywheel's off, if we discover that there's a rear main crankshaft seal leak, then we keep those seals in stock and we can do those at the same time. But that's just an example of some of the things that can be done whilst your car is so disassembled and having underside restoration work. There's a lot of labour saving to be had because so much of it is already separated and apart. Well, we've moved on and progressed well since the last time we looked at the underside of this E46 M3. As you can see, it's now been painted, seam sealed and painted, and the owner wanted body colour, which in this case is Phoenix yellow, which I think is a great choice. It really does complement the underside and makes it look quite something special. So last time when we looked at the car, we were dealing with some of the corrosion points in the central section, and since then we've gone on to complete the rear arch delete, which is where we convert the arches to a thin layer system, very similar to the CSL, where it's about 3 or 4 millimeters thick compared to the traditional U-shaped channel, which is quite arguably a poor design and collects a lot of water and mud and things like that. That removes some of the corrosion problems on the inner edge, and it's a panel bond adhesive that's applied to join the two pieces together, like the CSLs were, bonded together, not welded, and then blended in with some primer, seam sealer, and it all looks very good. At the outside at the moment you can't see the vehicle because it's still masked up from the painting process, but what that does is just future-proofs that area of the vehicle. It removes the corrosion problem and it also creates a nice thin channel compared to the U-shaped one. The same with the right-hand side as well. The arch delete is complete, and then that paint and sealer process have been blended out into the arches to complete the full underside appearance. We've also had to straighten and reinforce the jacking points because both jacking points had tipped. So the metal jacking points inside the structure isn't very strong and it tends to crease internally, just about here where there's a couple of spot welds behind that seal panel. And therefore we have to put a hydraulic tool system in there, pull them down straight and then cut open that seal. So this one has been cut open somewhere around about there, and there's a weld line across the top. Drill out the spot welds and then remove that piece to then reinforce it with the Redish Motorsport jacking point reinforcement plates, which are a triangulation system which go into the rear section of the inner seal, and they just get plug welded in just over there next to those two holes. Those two holes are for metal grommets, sorry, plastic grommets for the wiring box situation to fit, and we do the plug welds next to them, and then they've been linished back, so you wouldn't really know it's all been apart to that extent. And that's the same on the left hand side as well. And we're really pleased to say that we make them nearly invisible. So all this seal panel has been cut open, it's been straightened, it's been reinforced with an A-frame inside, and then re-welded back together, plug welded through the inside section up here, and nobody would be none the wiser if I hadn't have told you on this video. So all the fuel tank area is all done as well, corrosion removal process up into the small little tube section up there where the fuel tank vent pipes go in. The V-brace mounting boxes, all little bits of corrosion have been dug out around this section. The brake pipe and fuel tank brackets have been replaced. That's the fuel tank bracket for the front. That's the fuel tank bracket for the rear and the brake pipes. These are the new Redish Motorsport design ones. Taking care of some of the surface corrosion on the top of the RACP, around the spring perches and things like that. Obviously the V3 reinforcement plate kit, so you've got a front plate, a right plate, the two spacer plates, and then the two rearward plates at the back. With the new connection pieces, you can just see them through where the grommet holes are going to later cover. That plate just through there is the internal section that you can see from the inside of the boot, where we've cut through the boot floor corner to repair some spot welds and then dropped the 008 plates from the V3 kit down through the boot floor and connected the RACP, the back of it, which is called the cavity cover panel, connected that to the chassis legs, which reinforces that, creates a load relief system and makes sure that it doesn't flex and cause any further problems. So it's attacking it from both sides rather than just underside plates, which years ago were acceptable. Nowadays it's more of a double-edged affair where you go internal, and we've been doing those for quite a few years now as well. Battery box system is all dealt with. Brackets up here have been removed. There were two brackets at the top and one long one here, suffering with corrosion. That's blended out really nicely, so you don't even know that anything was there. If you hadn't really looked at an E46 before, you would just assume that that seam sealer under there is the exact same seam sealer applied from factory here, and it's just because we do a nice blend-in job. And then originally it was just going to be this, the upper section, this rear sort of section, and then the owner quite rightly wanted to extend that because he could see how well work was progressing and how nice it was coming up at the rear of the car. It made sense to do the underside central, which is the real visual, because this area here you don't get to see much of it once all the fuel tank system and the axle's back in place. But that central section in the picture here is always on view. Apart from the fact that there's an exhaust system down the centre and some brake pipes down there, everything else is exposed. There's no under trays in this part of the car, not like an E92, so it makes sense to try and get this area as best as possible as well, because that really does show it off. not only if you want to do any maintenance on your own car and admire it, but also when it goes in for further maintenance, service work, MOTs, things like that. Other workshops can see how well and how much you've invested into protecting a car for years to come. We had to deal with some weird corrosion that we found on the sill sections, which was lower down here behind the side skirts. The side skirts would go along this position, and there was some odd corrosion down at the front sections. We've taken care of that and then blended into the main central underside floors, including the chassis legs and the central tunnel, and dealing with some of the corrosion we were finding down the chassis legs here and on the outside edges. And it's just simply turned out really nice. We got a very gentle blend out, a little bit of texture just going past the swage line there to give it some further protection over what BMW left it with, because they put no seam sealer up on that lower section or side. It was just over the lap-in panels. So that's what it looks like at the moment, still masked up, and we have to unmask that once this is all dried, and then we can get on with the next important stage of the vehicle, which is cavity waxing and protecting all the internal sections. Well, once the sprayable seam sealer and the top coat colouring was dried, it's come out extremely well, by the way. I love the colour underneath this, so good. We went on to do cavity waxing, which we didn't actually get on video this time, I'm afraid, but we did do extensive cavity waxing through the wheel arch holes. That's why all the grommets are still out, the rear trailing arm pocket area, in through the whole section and through any of the little vents around the jacking point, because we've done significant structural reinforcement work inside the jacking points, and any of the little boxes where the fuel tank brackets are, and the V-brace mounting boxes, and then the chassis legs. Just a general good protection inside, just to benefit the internal sections, because obviously we can protect the outer section with this paint finish, but we cannot do that on the inside. You can't spray paint or seam sealer inside, so you have to do it with wax. That's how the factory do it. That's how they've been doing it for decades. They don't put a great amount in these cars, so we make sure that we do. We want them to last an extreme amount of time. Just look at the contrast on this. I just love these colours. Now, there's a few little fixings that are going to be steel original. Now, this owner originally hadn't planned for any powder coating work. It's just evolved as the process has gone on, and you can see benefits and time-saving natures of crossover jobs, like whilst all the axles out for this work, it makes sense to change all the subframe bushes. And well, if all the subframe bushes are coming out, well, it makes sense to powder coat the cradle, for example. So there's powder coated diff carrier in black, powder coated spring arms in aluminium silver, new lower arms as well, obviously bushes for those top and bottom arms, and the subframe bushes. We're going to be putting diff bushes in as well, and then we're going to be doing a few ball joints on the trailing arm where they pick up on these camber eccentric bolts over here. And that's just showing you some of the process or the rebuild work so far. This isn't an underside restoration. It could easily be turned into an underside restoration. When you go into this much level of detail for the chassis, it doesn't take then too much more effort to start replacing everything with new items. We've gone for new brake pipes, front to rear. There's a service joint down in the engine bay there. We've brought those along, got them parallel to the clipping points for the fuel pipe, and then up through the BMW clip pieces around the back of the fuel tank, and coming out to supply the left-hand side flexi just there. And there's a service joint just up there, and the right-hand side one was already done by this owner a while back, so that one remained because it wasn't in bad condition at all, almost looked brand new, to be honest. Then we've started putting the grommets back in the locations around the axle carrier panel, the new grommet locations we create there for cavity waxing, and we're just steadily starting to rebuild things up. Getting the differential will be going in soon, and also the trailing arms obviously need to be connected to the left and the right. We've got some of the under trays on, we've got the heat shields on for the rear exhaust silencer, and we're going to be putting the fuel tank vapor system in place correctly shortly. That's just a cable tie, yellow cable ties, just remind us things still need to be done, so that needs to be set up. And then it will be steadily rebuilding the central section. And remember, we did a central underside protection and did the blend out underneath the front wheel arch liners, just behind there, both sides. So when you look at the car visually from underneath, even though you won't be able to see much of this area soon because it'll all be covered with under trays and axle parts and exhaust, you'll still be able to see how magnificent the underside of the vehicle looks. So we're really pleased with this, not only the contrast, but just also how things are going, and we'll carry on with the rebuilding process. So the rebuild's going really well. We've got some nice contrasting components going against the Phoenix yellow underside. So starting off with heat shields, they're the most standout feature on the car. Some of the labels we still need to take off. We've just done our first initial test fit in those. Now remember, this isn't a full underside rebuild, but it is leaning towards that way. The car's sort of had a rear central rebuild. The outboard sections are still original, the trailing arms, the calipers and the shock absorbers, which all can be done at a separate visit another time. But the central section's coming out extremely well because we've gone for powder coated components on the diff carrier, also the upper arms in a Titan silver. We're aiming to change those anti-roll bar brackets soon as well. We're just waiting for those to come in from BMW. We've also gone for a diff overhaul. So on our website, as you can see, we've got lots of different options for diff overhauls, and this is what we call an option 5. So where it's an original diff that's overhauled with new clutch plates, new bearings, new seals. The casing is all stripped apart and shot blasted and then painted with a 2K durable paint finish, and a new rear cover, so that gets you new bushes front and rear. But the most important thing, being this what we call an option 5 on our website, it gets the BMW Motorsport 4.1 crown wheel and pinion set, which really enhances the acceleration of this car. What they really should have come with from factory, and doesn't actually cause any real issues with top speed. Even though you're going to lose a little bit of top speed, the cars are still more capable than ever needed, realistically. We've got other areas that we're working on at the moment. Rear heat shield for the rear silencer system, that's just been offered up. We've got some areas that still need a little bit of cleaning and things like that on where we're working, and we've still got our handprints. But anywhere where there's a fixing that's going against metal, we've got a wax component behind it to try and give sort of a buffage, and then also wax on the fixings to make sure there's no further corrosion developing. We've gone for new drive shafts as well because there was play within the CV joints on these, and also the original ones, they do suffer with a little bit of paint loss in the middle, which isn't the be all and end all, but it's normally spline wear which we get between the CV joints on the inner and the outer, so that's why those ones are new. And then we've upgraded, since the last time we may have looked at this car, we've upgraded a few other key components. So we've gone for anti-roll bar brackets, these ones up here that have been changed for new ones, along with the socket cap bolts, powder coated subframe washers and new rear subframe bolts as well. We've gone for a new xenon level system, which is the potentiometer, the brackets, the bolts, a new wiring plug on that end because the tabs normally break off, the new hockey stick brackets and the bracket up there that goes on the top arm, and obviously the drop link, which now articulates wonderfully. That ball and socket motion is going to be able to relay the suspension loadings to the potentiometer and therefore to the headlight leveling system to be able to make sure that's as accurate as possible. We've also gone for a powder coated push rod, and we'll be finishing that off later with a new V-brace which goes from that centre of that push rod bolt there across to those bolts that are in the V-brace mounting boxes on the chassis. So that's about it for the moment, the extras and the niceties on the rear of this vehicle, making it one hell of a special upgrade. We're also doing some front section items as well, a new front anti-roll bar, genuine BMW one, because that was quite corroded. We're doing some engine work and tidying up some areas up at the front of the vehicle. But here we go, the very sort of one of the last times we'll probably see it from underneath now until it's fully rebuilt, with the last few final things going on, which will be the exhaust system, some final plastic under trays. Oh, and not to forget the actual added extra that we can't really see. There we go, we've got a little bit of it visible there. It's had a new prop shaft. Not an overhauled one, not a replacement, not a used, a genuine BMW brand new prop shaft to remove that inherent play that they get in the ends of the splines. Not the CV joint. Lots of people think the CV joints wear, but that's a real misconception. It's actually the splines on the end of the prop shaft here, so inside that CV joint, that are poor, and this car was suffering a little bit. Not terribly, but it's just whilst you're in there doing a drivetrain refresh to this nature and having a new differential, new drive shafts, all new subframe bushes, new diff bushes, lower ball joints, things like that. It just really does finish it off and gives this car easily another 20 years worth of usage without hassle. So there it is, and we'll carry on the rebuild process now and get the car up to a condition where it can start to be tested. Well, that's this E46 M3 finished now, and wow, what a joy it is to drive. I've just come back off a 12-mile road test with a smile ear to ear, honestly grinning every part of it. It's the upgrades that this car has had are just fantastic. They complement it perfectly. So we've gone the Redish Motorsport V3 underside and the internal reinforcement process for the RACP. We've done the CSL rear arches at the rear, We've gone the central underside, corrosion protection, and the extended body coloured Phoenix yellow paint, which just complements it fantastic. New jacking points with the Redish Motorsport reinforcements internally, a new clutch, a new flywheel, all the internal small pieces for the bell housing, obviously the SMG adaptation process after, the ACL Conrod bearing package for the engine, the option 5 diff that we do on our website, which has got the BMW Motorsport 4.1 crown wheel and pinion set, which is one of the highlights of this and gives it incredible acceleration. Just feels so alive, this car. It's what it absolutely should have come with from factory. All the powder coated extras for the rear subframe, the upper spring arms, the rear subframe washers, the camber arms, the ball joints, then the extras for push rod, the V-brace, the exhaust heat shields underneath, new brake pipes, new anti-roll bars, new anti-roll bar drop links, rear xenon equipment, and then new drive shafts. Take all that play out of the drivetrain. Seeing it's had a new diff, full diff overhaul as well as the 4.1, why not do all the drive shafts? So we did. We took the play out of those drive shaft CV joints and splined ends, new genuine BMW ones, and a genuine BMW prop shaft as well. We went the whole hog, so got rid of that M clunk entirely. This car is just like a brand new one. I'm so excited to hand this over to the customer. I can't wait to hear them with their feedback once they've taken this home. It has been a fantastic process, lots of engine upgrades as well, some other maintenance work we've done with the car whilst it's been here. Just been a really enjoyable project. So if you've got something like this and you need a sort of midlife refresh on the car, you want to do some of this work, all of this work, or even more than this work, give us a call at Redish. We'll be more than happy to help you. Thank you very much for watching the whole video. Please do subscribe, like and share, and if you've enjoyed our work, then do hit the notification bell. We regularly upload, aim to do one a week on a Friday or Sunday. Yeah, so don't miss out on the next ones, and thanks again for watching.